Welcome back to the Hardware Unbox podcast for episode 31. Steve's with me here to talk about, well, two main topics really. Obviously the Intel crashing power spec situation. Steve's been covering a whole bunch of the I don't know, it's not really fallout just yet, but there's obviously a lot of things to talk about with baseline power profiles, what Intel's been doing, the whole power spec scenario and all that mess. We get into it. We spend quite a lot of time talking about that, and also some additional thoughts on the EK water block situation following GN, as in Gamers Nexus, more in-depth second part of their investigation, just some of our thoughts on, the interest around that and how it affects reviews. So, hope you enjoyed this episode. Let's get into it. All right, Steve, we've got a big episode today, I feel like. We've got some two hot topics to be talking about. EK water blocks. I've watched GN's entire video from a couple of days ago, his second video in the series. So there's a few thoughts, maybe some hot takes that I have there. And then obviously we've been looking at the Intel crashing and power specification situation. And I feel like there's been a lot of different opinions on that piece, a lot of different, passing, which I guess we expected to happen, passing the blame from person to person. But we'll get into that a bit more in a couple of minutes, I guess. But how are you going?
Yeah, pretty good, really. Pretty relaxed, just doing a bit of the usual kind of benchmarking and testing stuff. And obviously the Intel stuff was interesting and sort of a more, I don't know if enjoyable is the word I want to use, but it was more interesting. It was more interesting, and it was interesting in the sense that it's a topic that we've followed very closely for so long now, and have sort of been at the forefront of it through stuff like VRM thermal testing on really the entry-level boards is where the problems reared its ugly head the most over the last few generations. Would have never thought that we'd run into the stability problems we're seeing at the high end using default out-of-the-box settings, but here we are. I mean, it's something we've been advocating that Intel tidies up for 6 years now, something like that.
Yeah, I agree. First, though, I want to talk about Steve's videos, not you, Steve, other Steve from Gamers Nexus on EK water blocks, because I probably have a different take to a lot of people on this, I feel like. Maybe some people agree with me. I watched the entire video, the first one, the part 2 just came out since the last episode. Obviously, lots of people have been asking us, especially on the first podcast that we did a couple of weeks ago, about our opinion on this. I'm just watching the video. I'm getting through it. He's talking about all of the different issues that they were having at EK, the financial issues, the web of people that are involved, the bad governance. And honestly, I just don't find these stories overly interesting. They're not why I have gotten into covering tech. So when I watch these videos, there's some general interest there, like a company doing bad stuff. There's a little bit of interest there, similar to like you hear about companies like Boeing at the moment also having issues with various government and governance issues. But because it's not directly related to like the hardware that they make, and because it's not like they've found issues with the products being bad or whatever, and it's more all the surrounding stuff with how the company is run, I don't know, I just watched the video, I'm like, I'm not that enthralled by that whole situation. I guess that's why, when we did the Q&A it was last week, I think, and there was that question on EK, and I'd only watched bits and pieces of the Gamers Nexus video, and we sort of talked a little bit about it, but didn't really have super in-depth thoughts on it. I think that now seeing the whole story that he's presented in part 2, I think that really gets to why I didn't really have anything that interesting to say, I don't think.
Obviously, I like Gamers Nexus a lot. I'll respect Steve, think they do a terrific job. So this is absolutely in no way having a sort of an underhanded or sly attack at them. I think the investigations they do are great. I think they've done a lot of great investigations, and this content's probably great.
It is, it's excellent. It's really well reported. There's lots of information in it. So, absolutely.
I watched bits of the first one purely because of the Q&A question. And I thought, is this something I'm interested in? I watched bits of it and said, well, this is, typical good stuff from GN, but not something I really care about. And we sort of explained that EK is not really a company we've ever worked with before. I don't really care for their products, and this wasn't about them. If they were doing something really dodgy with their products and that surfaced and they weren't dealing with it correctly, then I want to know about it. But yeah, as you say, it's not that. And then the second one I haven't watched at all, but it seemed, yeah. I mean, you've already sort of summarized what it was about. Not a crack at Gion or anything. It's just it's not what motivates me. What I like doing in this industry and why I guess I'm a part of the industry. And we've had our chances to do, I suppose, this kind of content before. We've had a few interesting tidbits with some really good evidence come our way. And I suppose at times we have touched on it when it's resulted in the review program as such or the products, like when you exposed the LG, let's just say drama. And we've had a few other things, but there has been some other stuff there that we just didn't want to delve into because it wasn't about the products themselves. So yeah, I don't have much to say on it. I imagine anyone who's obviously watched the content is, well, they know more than I do. So there's probably no point me giving any kind of real opinion on it since I'm somewhat ignorant of the situation there.
Yeah, that's right. And I feel like as well, having, most of the work that I do is covering products or, whether that's hardware or software products or features or whatever. And part of it, like, I don't know whether I don't want to know about it because I am interested in how companies are run to a limited degree, but I don't want to have the governance and how they run their company influence the takes on the products themselves. And I feel like, when we were involved with NVIDIA getting into us about us reviewing and the whole they're going to deny us review samples and stuff, which does directly affect us. And some people at that time were sort of saying, oh, how could we stand behind NVIDIA at this point? Isn't this going to affect your reviews? It'll be fair if you decided to trash them because they've kind of exposed themselves as not doing things the right way. And that was never really my opinion on it. It's kind of like they've done this, but the products are the products. That's kind of how I want to test the products. Like I don't want to be thinking about testing the products, then having to think, oh, so this product's good, but now I have to factor in how the companies run. Are they doing things ethically? How's their governance? Are they treating their employees properly? It's a very complicated situation. I just try and stick to the things that I'm good at.
And it's difficult when they drag you into that, I don't know, level of stupidity. Let's be honest, that was unbelievably stupid from all parties involved on NVIDIA's side because it undermines the whole process. Now people who are giving positive takes on ray tracing because they genuinely like it's easy to review products from your perspective. It's really easy to do that. So if you're a single player gamer, you play mostly on controller, so you're kind of a console gamer on PC, but you've migrated to PC because you get higher resolutions and higher visual qualities, and they're all the things that really excite you about the gaming experience. So you might be happy with low frame rates, and therefore you might love what ray tracing has to offer. So you, from your perspective, which is completely valid, you think ray tracing is a fantastic technology, and you're not too worried about the shortcomings of it because they don't impact you. But then because you're giving it a positive review, NVIDIA's gone and undermined that person's perspective because now they're like, oh, yeah, they're paid by NVIDIA because they think ray tracing is good. It even undermines moving forward. So say the next generation of ray tracing is much better, which lo and behold, ray tracing has continued to get better as time's gone by. Things like upscaling have continued to get better as time's gone by. And now we've started saying good things about them. And the amount of comments we get where people are like, you guys have changed ever since NVIDIA, threatened to change. It's like, you realize how badly that went for NVIDIA and how well that went for us. That is in no way going to encourage us to do what NVIDIA wants. Quite the opposite. But as you say, neither direction was changed out of it. We still went about things the way we went about them. But yeah, you do get these situations where people think that you're, going about it for whatever reason, whether it's to be positive or overly negative or whatever. And of course, we've seen that all again with this Intel situation. But sorry, Tim, I didn't mean to derail you there, so you can get things back on track if you like.
No, I mean, I totally agree with that on the whole NVIDIA situation because that's even more, I feel like that's even more related to what we usually talk about than, governance issues at a company that don't affect the products, because reviewing the products was affected by the NVIDIA situation. They were directly trying to affect the review process. Whereas with the EK situation, like the products may still, for all I know, be of great quality and be worth buying. But then you've got, on the other hand, all these issues that are being brought up about how the companies run, and potentially to the point where the company will go out of business, which makes it's kind of an even additional layer of complexity to the reviewing process, where it's like normally you wouldn't really know as a reviewer whether the company that you're reviewing the products of is going to be around in a few years. You would just assume that that's the case because that's the case for most companies.
I think before you carry on, I'm trying to head off negative feedback in the comment section here for you. We really need to sit down together and put a disclaimer together that Tim does not condone the actions of EK representatives, blah, blah, blah. Like what you're saying is, as content and with the reviews, you don't really care about this stuff, but you're not saying it's not important, and you're not saying a blind eye should be turned to it. You're happy that GN's you're happy that it's been exposed. You're happy that GN's exposed it. It's just not content you would be interested in doing because you like reviewing the products. That's what we're here for. We're not here for reviewing the companies and all that, but we think the way employees may have been mistreated, people not getting paid, that's all very bad, and we're very appreciative of GN. I just want to make that clear, though, because it sounds like we're trying to downplay the whole GN thing, or at least I know some people will take it that way. So I needed to jump in with that disclaimer because I was reading the comments section already.
Yeah, you're preempting the comment section. I mean,
I was reading about how much of a terrible person you are, and I'm like, no, Tim.
Fair enough. No, I mean, this sort of reporting is very important, and it's important across all industries, whether it's PC, hardware, or any other industry. This type of report, this is entirely why journalism should exist. Like, this is the sort of reporting that serious journalists are extremely interested in. But I don't really see myself as someone that is a journalist in that way. Like, I cover products. And so,
we're product nerds.
Yeah, the things that I'm interested in are related to products. And I think when I'm talking about, whether or not this will be relevant for reviewing products, it's not meaning that we should minimize the fact that employees have been treated terribly and they're mismanaging finances and there's all sorts of, government issues surrounding that company as well. That's all important, but I think there's a limit to how much that should be factored into the review process. Otherwise, you will be going down rabbit holes and things that will be very difficult to work your way out of because there'll be so many webs and things,
Well, it's not who's most virtuous, because whenever I do a motherboard roundup and it's exposed that Asus is doing something underhanded, oh, you guys, if you had any kind of integrity, you'd boycott Asus. It's like, well, hang on a minute. Gigabyte did that last week, and the week before MSI did it. So we do our best to pull them up on, shady things in the reviews when it's about the product. But they're for-profit companies. None of them are angels. Now, there are varying degrees of how corrupt things can be, sure. But yeah, all I'm getting at is, I guess, this is when we get accused of being AMD biased or Intel biased or NVIDIA biased, which crazily enough and funnily enough, depending on which corner of the internet you go to, we will be accused of being one of those things. We don't give a rat's about AMD, really, as a company. Don't care about them. I have no shares, nothing in AMD. Same with EK, Gigabyte, Asus, pick a brand, MSI, doesn't matter. Don't care about the brand. I have no investment in any of the brands. I don't feel strongly about one more than the other. As you say, we're reviewing their products. So 1 week, I might trash X570 motherboards from MSI because they sucked. But then I might be praising their B650 boards because they're great. And then I might be trashing, like, we just review the products and we tell you which ones are good and which ones are bad. And sometimes it's MSI, sometimes it's Asus. They seem to like to take it in turns for whatever reason.
I feel like as well, a lot of people, they get annoyed when you don't bring in the external things. Like, for example, when Asus motherboards were blowing up the 7800X3D for that period around the launch of that CPU, there's a lot of discussion about, surely you should be bringing this up in the next time that you're testing review product, Asus product, or, there's been warranty concerns about various different companies over the years. There'll be the times that they're brought up as being bad in terms of their warranty services. And I think maybe Asus was involved with something along those lines with that situation.
Fortunately, their AM5 boards for the most part weren't very good, and I told you not to buy them anyway. So
yeah,
that was a happy coincidence.
You know what I mean, right? Like, people want those things brought in. They want people to factor in. Like, how many times do we hear on, let's say I'm covering FSR versus DLSS or something, and people want me to factor in the DLSS isn't open source and FSR is open source, even though it's never been clear whether that actually provides a benefit to consumers. And some people bring up the point of, like, well, doing it open source is the more quote unquote ethical way to make that sort of software because it's more open and available to all. And I've never factored that in as a pro or con really to the software. If it allows it to run on more products, then it allows it to run on more products. That's the benefit. But it's simply being open or not. It's not something I really care all that much about. And I feel like people get very mad at that sort of opinion. Like they're like, oh, but AMD is doing the quote unquote again, more ethical and more, consumer friendly way of going about it. Like they do things better the right way, as opposed to Nvidia that's all locked down and secretive and makes black boxes. And it's like, unless it affects the products directly and what they're actually providing to consumers, generally speaking, it's not going to be something I factor in. But I think with EK, it's probably a step beyond that usual thing because based on what GN's shown in his videos, it's not clear to me whether the company is going to be around for very much longer. So if not that we will be reviewing EK products because we've never really reviewed that sort of product ever, but if it came to it, it'd be difficult to get around the fact that like how would I recommend a product from a company that may not be selling products in like a year or is going to go out of business because their shady business practices are exposed? Like, I don't want to be recommending generally a product to people which they won't be able to get a warranty claim on because in a year the company won't exist and you've bought this, you spend all this money and then something goes wrong, you've got no recourse because they've gone out of business. I feel like normally I would just be like, okay, there's some issues with this company, but let's focus on the products. Let's see how they're going. Let's test them against their competitors. But I don't know. In this sort of situation, would you factor in the potential of a company going under or out of business into a review, or would you just like not review the product at all?
It's a tough one. I think I would review the product to show what the product's capable of and whether it's good or bad, worth buying to begin with. And then I think at the end, I'd potentially give a disclaimer about, potential issues and within the company and whether that's a factor for you not to buy the product because we don't know how long the company will be around for. It seems like it's mismanaged, but it's tough to get into all that because, EK could be around for the next 20 years for all I know.
Yeah, we really have no idea.
Have no idea. So, it is a tough one for sure.
So I think just wrapping up that discussion again, don't want to minimize GN's work at all. I think it's excellent investigation. And at times I even watch those videos and obviously they've done a number of them now and you get kind of jealous of that sort of reporting. And you're like, wow, if I'd gone down a different path with the way that I, am in this industry, then potentially those are the sorts of things that I would be keen on doing.
It's not too late to pivot, Tim. You can do it.
Yeah, maybe, but I feel like
I will support you in any endeavor from the comfort of my seat.
It'd be interesting if we took that turn, but no, I think I'll be sticking to largely product review coverage. But anyway, that's sort of I don't know whether that's a hot take or a controversial take or something about how I would factor in these things to my review process. And yeah, like I said, I sort of see this as something that's generally interesting, but in the PC hardware space, again, I'm sort of, if there was a big issue with their products or something like that, then it'd be like a next level thing for me. Like if it turned out that they were making claims on their products that they performed in a certain way and then they didn't, I'd be all over that. But for now, if it's governance and financials, even financial reports, like I know a lot of people are really into the like how much money has Nvidia or AMD made in the last quarter and where's all the sources of their money? Like, was it server parts? Was it, console hardware? And I see those reports, I'm like, okay, cool. So
yeah,
anyway.
I mean, it can give some insight into how things are going and where they're placing their focus. So that it can be of benefit, but not so much for actually evaluating and reviewing a product. It's fairly worthless, I suppose, in that sense. So it depends on how into things you are and how much you want to know, I suppose.
So yeah, again, if you're interested in these sorts of pieces of content, investigating governance of companies and those sorts of things, the GN investigation is excellent. So if you wanted to learn exactly how EK has been running their business, which by the sounds of things is terribly, then I'd highly recommend watching their two videos. And it sounds like there's more to come on that front as well in how they've sort of been approaching and looking into it. So lots of things to play out there.
And in the not too distant future, we will be sitting. Yeah, sitting is what they do. We'll be sitting down with Steve to have a chat about stuff, probably on his channel, and then we'll probably film something for our channel as well. So we're doing that sort of towards the end of the Computex week. So Steve sort of locked us in for that. So we're pretty excited to catch up with him and have a proper chat because we've never really done it before. I mean, I chat to Steve regularly on online, but it's not really the same thing. So that'll be cool. So yeah,
Cool.
he might investigate Tim and see if he's up to the task.
Well, we'll see about
He'll
that.
probably find out you got too much Lego.
Well, it's true. Sort of looking around. Anyway, let's get into Intel crashing, the power spec situation, and everything that we've been covering lately. So, first of all, did you want to just give a brief recap of your video for people that haven't watched it? Obviously, I'd recommend people go and watch the full video where you've tested the new baseline power profiles, but how's things gone up until this point?
A brief recap. Could you ask a simpler question? So a recap about the situation with Asus and Gigabyte, like with the baseline.
I don't think we have to go back to a decade ago when this whole thing sort of started, but
it was a sunny day on Yeah, so I guess the recent development is that Intel 13th gen and 14th gen, primarily Core i9 K-SKU processors, have started crashing, or not all of them, but a lot of people, an alarming amount of people, have been reporting crashing while gaming with their CPUs and presumably other workloads. And Buildzoid, for example, has a 14900K that out of the box, he says, crashes running Cinebench. So could be particularly bad silicon. It could just be a CPU that needs to be RMA'd in that situation. But CPUs have started crashing more than expected. Other companies, game developers, and NVIDIA investigated because it was being reported as an NVIDIA issue, like an out of VRAM type issue. And it turned out, after all external parties had done their investigations, that it was the K-SKU Core i9 processors running too aggressively out of the box, the way people had them configured on their presumably Z690 and Z790 motherboards. And therefore they had to dial them back. So Intel got involved by this point. They did their investigation, and they also concluded that running without power limits was a problem for these CPUs that were already pushed so high. And therefore they came up with the Intel baseline profile, which isn't the official, or it's just an official specification. So it's not the official specification. It's just, they've got a new one that if you're having stability problems, it's a one-click enable option and it should stabilize your system. So that's, I think, pretty much what led to us looking into it with the video, because we now had some BIOSes on hand. We could test the BIOSes, see what it meant for performance, see how it compared to the unlimited power specification, which is an official in spec specification. Great point of contention, that one. So, you happy with that, Tim?
Yeah, I think that's a good summary of where things are at. And in the video, you quite clearly blame mostly Intel, but also motherboard vendors for the situation. And this has been, I think, probably the largest point of contention. There's a few points to cover because there's, you've responded to a few things on Twitter relating to these sorts of things. But I think the largest point of contention has been how much blame should be put on Intel versus the motherboard manufacturers. And initially, I think generally the opinion of people was that it was the motherboard manufacturer's fault. I was certainly seeing a lot of complaints that, Asus, Gigabyte, MSI, ASRock were going beyond what Intel had officially said was the specification, and therefore potentially automatically overclocking the chips or something along those lines to cause the stability problems. However, upon looking more closely at how things are being run and the broadness of the Intel specification in general, I think we've both come to the conclusion quite fairly that ultimately this is largely Intel's responsibility, and it does come from the fact that they have allowed quite a wide range of power specifications. They claim these things are in spec and not overclocking, and that as well, it is Intel's job ultimately to validate the motherboards, their BIOSes, to ensure stability, and that potentially that side of things has been a bit lax lately.
That's the logic check on the whole thing. But Intel has been, I would say, the nicest way I can put it is extremely sneaky. So what they've done is they've said it's a 125 watt CPU, which, that's the TDP BS. But they've advertised it as this is a 125 watt CPU, which a lot of people are confused as to where that number derives from. And then with 12th gen, they cleared it up to say, well, look, the I don't even know if they used the term official spec, but they said the spec, which is a spec, is PL1 equals 253 watts, PL2 equals 253 watts, PL1 is equal to PL2. So in that sense, there's no turbo duration time or anything like that. It's just the CPU can go up to 253 watts and it can run at 253 watts indefinitely, providing you have the adequate power delivery and cooling capabilities to enable that. And that was that. End of story. Thing was, though, that's where they're being sneaky. That's one of the specs. It's a spec. It's not the spec. And that's what people kept getting hung up. But Intel said the official spec's 253 watt. No, they didn't. They said 253 watt PL1 equals PL2 is a specification. It's one of their recommended specifications. But when you speak to the motherboard manufacturers and you go, why are you guys running with no power limits and why is the turbo duration gone? Oh, well, it's recommended by Intel. Like that's one of their recommended specs. We're allowed to do that. And then you speak to Intel and you say, hang on, why is this MSI motherboard pushing it to suck down 400 watts? That's surely out of spec. Oh, no, that's actually the expected behavior. We just recommend these settings, but they're, as long as they're not overclocking, then it's fine. And by their definition, to overclock it, really the only definition they've ever given me to overclock is to change the clock multiplier table, to change the turbo boost ratios. As long as the turbo boost ratios are, locked at the highest possible value and they can't exceed that, then it's not overclocking. So they're being very sneaky. They're officially, they're appearing to say an official capacity 253 watts PL1, 253 watts PL2 with no turbo timer is the official specification. People fixate on that. They say that's the specification they give on their website. That's the one you find everywhere. Therefore, that's the official specification. They're basically saying here's a speed limit that we're putting out there publicly, but it's not actually the speed limit. Now, we recommend you take that corner at 70 kilometers per hour, but our car can really do it at 100, so just do that. And that's what they're doing. And then the motherboard manufacturers look guilty because nowhere does Intel publicly say in any of that specification stuff. Well, that might not be true, actually. I think there are some guides that they give to motherboard manufacturers that say they can run without power limits. And they've certainly publicly said that, which I pointed out in my video. But it's this situation where I said they're trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to say, this is how to run it, but then you buy the CPU, and in a lot of instances, you're getting the out-of-the-box experience without power limits. And on a lot of the boards, you have to click one button, and that's not the case anyway. And then, as you say, it's Intel's fault no matter which way. It's like, if you understand the situation, if you understand the industry, if you understand how all of this works, it's Intel's fault. So I can't start hardware unboxed motherboards tomorrow and start selling motherboards that overclock the crap out of an Intel CPU on my, the Hub Z790 motherboard. I can't overclock the crap out of the CPU and sell that board because Intel will say, hang on a minute, you're out of spec there. We don't allow that. You're invalidating warranties. And I would be doing that if the turbo ratios changed by default on my board. Intel isn't going to sit there and say that's fine. They're going to say, no, we sell you the chipset. We allow you to put our logo. In fact, it's mandated that you have our logo to show that this is a genuine Intel partnered product. So if you're not going to adhere to our specification and follow our rules, see you later. We're not selling you chipsets. That's what happens, guys. It's the same as NVIDIA. You can't go put 16 gigabytes of VRAM on an RTX 4060. There's no technical reason why you can't do it. You can clamshell that thing and do it, and you've got a 4060 Ti situation.
And modders have done it on older products.
The reason you can't do it is because NVIDIA doesn't want you wrecking their product segmentation. You're not allowed to do it. So in the past, we've had examples where partners, and this is a problem I think EK had with them, partners have gone and made their own unique product to make a unique product that people want to buy that makes their product better than other products. And NVIDIA's like, no, you can't do that. You have to use the exact power targets we want. You have to use the exact memory configurations we want. It's all locked down. You can create a cooler around that, and there's probably a lot of rules and regulation in that as well. And that does ensure that you get what you've been sold. Whereas Intel, has had a very broadly defined power spec because it's been to their benefit really for a long time. It's only recently got them in trouble. Before this, it was, it was either win the benchmarks, they were going to lose power efficiency anyway.
I mean, with the overclocking situation, board manufacturers have tried at times to do things that are clearly out of spec. I'm thinking of, for example, overclocking on B series motherboards, specifically. There's been some BCLK overclocking at times. Those things have been unlocked, and it has been quite quickly reverted in a BIOS update. Those BIOSes have been deleted. I feel like maybe motherboard manufacturers try and sneak those things out to get a bit of advantage. But Intel, whenever that's happened, they have not been happy, and they've very quickly clamped down on those sorts of things so that you can't just have boards where they've clearly said you can't overclock on them, allowing overclocking, even though there's really no technical limitation why that would be the case. It's Intel has mandated that, therefore that's the way things are. And that's why, there would obviously be advantages for these board manufacturers to essentially by default overclock these boards, these CPUs. And there has been times when they've attempted to do that. And again, Intel has come in and be like, no, that is overclocking behavior enabled by default. You can't do that. The best you can do is run with unlimited power, but we're not allowing you to change those multiply tables. We're not allowing you to do BCLK overclocking out of the box. So you got to do that, but all the other stuff, just do whatever there.
Well, yeah, they're just, that's right. They've said you're able to do it. They're very clearly telling their partners what they can and cannot do, and they've always done that. But people seem to think that the motherboard manufacturers have all the power, can go do whatever
rogue.
they want.
Yeah,
they've gone rogue, and poor old Intel's there with the the meme with the leash and the pit bulls pulling them down the road, and they're just getting pulled in every direction. It's not happening. Like, they're the governing body for their own platforms, believe it or not, and they fully dictate. Intel's a dictatorship. They dictate who gets chipsets. They're not selling chipsets to people who aren't doing what they want them to do, and they should. They should go about it that way. They shouldn't be selling chipsets to someone who's making boards that are potentially killing the CPUs or running in an unsafe manner. They should be governing their own platform, and AMD definitely does that for theirs. Intel's been doing it for theirs forever and a day. So it just makes sense that they would do that.
They're clearly going to validate it because it's on Intel to run RMAs for the CPUs. So if the motherboards are blowing up the CPUs, Intel has to fulfill the RMAs. So they're going to get very mad if there's a motherboard vendor out there that's running at genuinely out of spec behavior, blowing up CPUs that Intel needs to pay to replace. So they're clearly not going to want that to be the case.
Logically, yeah. And again, the most important thing to understand is Intel has their partners over a barrel, as does NVIDIA, as does AMD. You can't sell motherboards supporting Intel CPUs, first of all, legally without Intel say so, but you also can't do so without Intel enabling it to happen. They need to supply you the chipsets. So, and they're supposed to have a motherboard validation program, mind you. So you can't just they don't just sell you a chipset and you're like, oh, I think we're going to make a board and we'll just sell that. Like, you have to make the board, send it to Intel, validate the design, make sure it's all working the way they like and offering what they want it to offer, supporting the features they advertise to feature. And I don't know if this is the case on Intel's side, but I imagine it is. I've had it confirmed to me by people that would know that when you release an AMD BIOS, for example, it has to go to AMD. So they create the AGESA code and they're essentially putting their user interface over it. But even after they've done that, AMD still certifies it. Kind of like, you get Microsoft certified drivers as well for Windows and things like that. So the driver's been sent to them and they certify it for operation on their operating system. So there's a validation and certification program. And really, if there wasn't, there should be. Because again, Intel's allowing them to put their logo on their box. We've stamped this, it's Intel approved.
And AMD's validation process failed in the case of the 7800X3Ds exploding, and they took some responsibility, the majority of the responsibility for that problem, because again, it's their platform. So they can't just put all the blame on Asus if they're running a validation system, because their validation system should have caught it. It didn't. The CPUs blew up. They took responsibility.
Well, the situations are quite different as well, which we might as well talk about quickly because a very limited number of people on X of all places, criticized us of being AMD biased because we didn't cover the AMD AM5 issue, whereas
Right.
we've covered
Yep.
this Intel issue. And first of all, what you just said, those two issues are very different for me, because this was obviously the AM5 thing was a teething issue. It was a very serious problem with the platform that needed addressing quickly, and I believe it was. But it was a serious issue nonetheless. But it wasn't, it wasn't like, oh, here we go again, AMD CPUs, boiling over and and breaking. Like, that never happened on AM4. I'm sure there was some CPUs that died in AM4, but it's not an ongoing problem that we've been warning of AMD about for the better part of a decade. Whereas with these power limits, we've had an issue with this exact problem for multiple different reasons. It first started off that you didn't know what cooler to use with the CPU, and that was a pain in the backside because the TDP was just meaningless. So it was difficult to cool these CPUs, which proved truer and truer as time went by. But we first started with the problem with the cooler and throttling, right? Then it went from that to VRMs being incapable of driving the CPUs anywhere near the advertised performance and not even running at base clocks, which still happens to this day and is kind of baffling that that's still just, I don't know, there's no pushback against it. It just happens. And now we've got to the stability problem. So it's been a long-lasting, ongoing problem that we've been trying to address directly with Intel for 6 years. So it makes sense that, as I said, we're kind of on this topic. We've just recently been talking about it, and then this happens, so it makes sense that we'd talk about it. But also, it wasn't like the second this happened, we jumped on it. Like, people have been talking about this now for quite a few weeks, that the stability issues have been very widely known. But there wasn't too much for us to add to the story, really, apart from told you so.
Yeah, especially as far as like the how many CPUs are affected. Is this a widespread issue? Like, it's very difficult to find out that information. I would say it's basically impossible for us to go and say, to make a report covering, like, you can cover it from a news perspective, but to offer anything that hasn't been publicly said is sort of stability things incredibly difficult.
So what we can go and add to the story now is we have two different brands with two BIOSes specifically addressing this issue with an option to test. So we have some real content there. We can provide you guys with some real information. And that was the catalyst for that video.
Yep.
Then we see that motherboard manufacturers are getting blamed. We see Intel's response. And we're like, hang on a minute. Hey, back up a minute. We know for a fact that Intel has told us directly that what all of their partners are doing with these no power limits, no turbo time windows is in spec. They've shut us down completely whenever we've asked about it. I'm like, nope, that's expected behavior, what you're seeing there. So what do we test, Intel? Whatever you like. They're all in spec. So then we've ultimately gone with the no power limits because that's the behavior we've seen on most of the boards we've tested. And we've also polled it with our audience, and that's the testing they wanted to see. So anyway, before I'm going down a rabbit hole, Tim, so I'll bring myself back. But basically, they're two different stories is what I'm getting at. And we had very different information for each one. So with the Intel situation, we know about all the issues that we've covered to date, which have been numerous, and then we could actually benchmark them, look into them, and we know for a fact that Intel's, I don't know, what do you want to say, bending the truth at the very least as to what's in spec and what's out of spec. And now they're saying, please use the correct spec. And I've got a lot to say about that as well. But anyway, with the AM5 issue, CPUs burning up and all that, we had every intention of covering that story. As soon as it started to become a story, we started looking into it. How easy is this to replicate? We started speaking to all of our industry contacts. We spoke with retailers. How many CPUs are you seeing coming back damaged? And the answer was none. So I couldn't find anyone that had actually seen this problem. There was only a couple of reports online at the time. It wasn't like the melted power connectors where you were seeing new pictures every single day. So there wasn't that much to...
Single digit numbers, maybe? I know Gamers Nexus blew up one, but...
Well, I spoke to Steve about it as well, which I haven't said publicly, but we were trying to work out what story is there? How do we replicate this? How do we show it? What information can we gather to make a video? And really, by the time we were sort of getting nowhere with it. GN made their video. I reached out to Steve straight away and said, look, in your opinion, how serious is this issue? Are people likely to run into it? And should we still be recommending I asked Steve directly, should we still be recommending AM5 CPUs? Because obviously we don't want to recommend AMD CPUs if there's a real problem and a fundamental flaw in the design. And Steve's response essentially was, look, at this point in time, I'm pretty sure more AM5 CPUs have died in AMD's labs trying to work out exactly what's going on here than they have in the wild. So essentially he was saying he doesn't think that this is a problem that a lot of people have run into to this point in time. However, he believed that ongoing, like sort of what we said with this Intel situation, many, many months or a year or years down the track, that it would be a big problem and there'd be a lot of dead CPUs that there shouldn't have been otherwise. But he basically said to me, look, they know what the problem is now. They're rolling out fixes. A week from now, this should be solved. It should be a non-story. So they were investigating to see what was going on and what the problem was, but they weren't saying, don't buy an AM5 CPU. They're essentially saying, look, be a bit cautious at the moment. This should be addressed. Once the firmware is rolled out, the situation's fixed. And shortly after, AMD again basically owned up to the problem, rolled out the firmware, and it was fixed. And for that period, what was there to talk about? Like, what evidence did we have? What could we have made a video about?
Yeah, if it wasn't covering the news specifically, like just saying what was going on, there's not really a lot that can be added to that story. And I feel like when these stories come up, people get very annoyed when we don't cover something or don't speak about something. And with the podcast that we now have, which we didn't have back when that situation was ongoing, we'd probably be more likely to speak about, just give our thoughts on it on this show as opposed to making a dedicated video on it. But, when it comes to reporting stories, it can take a long time to look into exactly what's going on. And for a lot of things, it may go nowhere. There may not be anything to really talk about or anything to add to the story. You may ask people in the industry and they don't really know what's going on. And it could take weeks for industry contacts to get up to speed with what's going on, to learn what actually is the cause of the problem or what all the people are saying, all the important people are saying. And by the time in that case, 2 weeks could be the BIOS updates rolled out at that point, and it's kind of the story's over. And you don't want to then go a week after it's sold, then making this whole big story about how they stuffed it up in the first place when it's already kind of solved. So again, I feel like that's a responsible way of reporting on things, is kind of looking into it, seeing what there is and what there isn't to say,
right.
really.
And even when they rolled out the fix, the newer GISA code, I benchmarked that because people were claiming that they claimed the same thing with NVIDIA and can't remember it was Ampere, wasn't it? It was Ampere when they had the driver bug. People were claiming that to fix this problem, they've had to dial down the voltage, which will lower clock speeds and they won't be as fast. And look, if that was the case, we would have jumped all over AMD with tangible evidence. We would have had some benchmark results. I benchmarked them, got the exact same numbers, and of course, that story it was never a true story, so there was nothing to cover there. So again, we could have done some sort of follow-up content on the fix and what AMD's done there and if it's dodgy or not, but they solved the problem. There was no performance-related consequences that we could detect, and to my knowledge, no one else has. It was fixed, so you kind of have to move along. Whereas with this Intel baseline power spec, there's some serious performance degradation. So that's worth investigating and talking about. But anyway, I mean, I think that clears up. Also, the other thing as well, just for future reference, if someone's wondering why we didn't cover a specific story, is sometimes it's timing. Sometimes we just, if, for example, Zen 5 was being released over the last few weeks, I have no time to look at some sort of Intel stability story. It's just not happening. So this would have gone completely under the radar. We wouldn't have covered it. We wouldn't have talked about we would have benchmarked the baseline profiles, a month later or something. So we would have done our best to get to it, but it wouldn't have been a high priority. New exciting products are always, and likewise, it doesn't have to be Zen 5. It could be a brand new Intel architecture. If that was being launched, that would overshadow this story and deprioritize it for us. And we might not get to it for months. And it's not because we're trying to, and then people would accuse us of, oh, you're burying this negative Intel story and covering their new products. It's like, well, no, it's just the new products are much more exciting to cover and people are more interested in them.
Yeah, and
So,
we trust the reporting of other people as well. Gamers
mhm,
Nexus cover that story well. Same with the EK situation. Like, there's no point us going and digging up all the stuff that they've already found out in their reporting. Like, there's no point
mhm,
us independently, separately investigating and finding out all the documents and stuff that they've already found. May as well just leave it to them to do that investigation. And, so long as that they're going about it in the way that it should be done, like there's no obvious gaps or anything that they've left in that sort of coverage. Then again, like they did that coverage of the AMD CPU blowing up situation quite well. They covered all the angles to it. You look at it, you're like, yeah, can't really add anything to that story. So there's no point us basically just copy pasting that story into another video outside of maybe a podcast type discussion where really it would
mhm.
just be our thoughts on it as opposed to breaking down what's happening. But
Well, it's the same thing. Like, we didn't jump on Nvidia for their power connector issues. We talked
mhm,
about it, and we basically said like what we said about the AM5 thing. It's like, seems to be a problem. We're definitely seeing online reports of these things being melted.
mhm.
How prevalent it is, how much of a problem it is, how it's going to develop is all yet to be seen. We're going to monitor the situation, but you know, it seems like it's probably a pretty crap connector because this wouldn't be happening otherwise. But we don't have too much to add on the topic that other people haven't added. And then, I talked about the Ampere thing. We looked into the whole, what was the pos caps, that whole
Yeah,
drama.
yeah.
And we looked into it, found out that it had nothing to do with capacitors at all. And it had everything to do with the release driver being buggy as hell and fluctuating frequencies to the point that caused instability. The new driver came out, leveled out the clock frequencies, didn't degrade performance in any way, and completely solved the problem. End of story. So that was positive reporting that we did there for NVIDIA on a situation that could have gone, I don't know, either way. They could have been doing something
Yep.
dodgy, or it turns out it was just a bug that they fixed and they did it in a
Mhm.
relatively timely manner, but it caused a bit of hoo-ha.
I've seen a bit of confusion around exactly what the power specification is. So I think it's probably worth just briefly recapping
What is it, Tim?
actually what the power spec, like what is and isn't the power spec. So
Yeah.
I'll try my best to briefly explain this. So Intel has multiple documents that are either public or not public and are provided to motherboard manufacturers and partners that detail a whole range of different values that can be applied to the CPU. So this would be things like power, current limits, voltage, all sorts of parameters. What you get from in the public is very basic information, which may be things like your PL1. Maybe you might see the TDP advertised on the little ARC page on the Intel website. But there's much more in-depth documents that some of them are available, some of them are not available, that motherboard manufacturers have access to. And essentially, most of these documents offer a range of configurations. And this is common not just for CPUs, but for many different components. Like if you're building, I don't know, a PCB and you want to know what the tolerances and ratings are for a transistor that you're putting on that PCB, there'll be a spec sheet, a data table that will list minimum, recommended, and maximum values. And Intel with their CPUs is no different. So typically for something like a power limit, let's say PL1 or PL2, there will be their minimum specification, which would be, potentially as low as 0 watts, but there might be a recommendation which will be in the middle there somewhere around 253 watts. And then there'll be a maximum, which for some of these documents is listed as there being no limit. It'll be NA or something like that in the maximum column. So motherboard manufacturers have flexibility to choose anything inside the range that is given to them in those documents. So there's no defined specific specification that is official where other specifications are unofficial. It's always been and has been for a long time now a range, which allows them to advertise things like a 125 watt TDP because that's inside the range. It allows them to talk about PL1 equals PL2 at 253 watts because that is again inside the range that they're qualifying. And so, with some of the values that you see in those data sheets, there may be no limit on them. Again, power is one of those, and they've talked publicly about how power and the tau timer can be configured to anything, and that's all possible. But then there'll be things like certain voltages and current limits where there will be some specification that Intel says you cannot exceed because it will obviously blow up the processor. The issue with these sorts of things is that people get this idea that there's one set of numbers in a table somewhere that motherboard manufacturers, they have to input as the default values. But all Intel has been doing this entire time and up to now is that they provide at best a recommendation. It's not that what is or isn't a recommendation is out of spec. It's merely a recommendation that's within the range of specs that they provide for those processors. So some motherboard manufacturers, like you saw with Asus, they will look at the recommended values from Intel and be like, okay, so we're going to implement PL1 equals PL2 at 253 watts as our default in the motherboard. Another manufacturer like Gigabyte will be like, okay, Intel's recommended that. However, we've read the spec sheet. The spec sheet says there's no limits, and that's a fair and perfectly fine configuration. So we'll configure our board with no limits. But it's all in spec behavior as defined by those documents. And what's been really confusing for people, and I think this has played into this scenario, is that Intel doesn't really publish the recommended values to consumers publicly. That's kind of given to board manufacturers a little bit, but it's not like they're saying, okay, here's all the things that we recommend consumers run at. PL1 equals 253 watts. PL2 equals 253 watts. Here's ICC max. Here's what you should be doing for all the thermal velocity boost stuff. Should that be enabled or enabled? They're not really giving you that information.
Well, it's not build a BIOS.
No, it's not. You're meant to trust the motherboard vendors, but people are sort of wondering at the moment, like, how should I be running? Like, what configuration should I be changing into? But Intel doesn't really provide that, which again, then people go, okay, well, oh no, well, now is it what Intel's advertised in their performance numbers when they show, the benchmark charts and they show PL1 equals PL2? Is that right? Or, the CPU's advertised at 125 watts. Is that right? Is the default configuration the motherboard manufacturers provide? Is that correct? I don't know, because Intel doesn't tell you, but the intention has always been that they shouldn't need to tell you, because it is intended for motherboard manufacturers to implement so that they can get it right, so that the consumer doesn't need to know those values and doesn't need to worry about those things, because ideally that would be the case. But just to be very clear, specifications with components generally across CPUs and all other components that you would see manufacturing in these sorts of industries, there is always a range of values that are allowed and are in spec, and it's up to the integrator of that component to run it inside that range. And this is no different with Intel CPUs, and it's why it's kind of created a mess, because the range is probably a bit too large.
And 253 watts for PL1 and PL2 is a reasonable recommendation. I mean, it's still a lot of power, but I guess they're saying, look, this is our Core i9 flagship CPU. You need to make sure that you're delivering enough power, and of course, you're also going to need adequate cooling. So that's that. But if you guys want to make godlike motherboards, ROG Strix motherboards and stuff like that, these CPUs don't need to be power limited. They can just run at the clock multiplier table. So that is to say, you don't need power limits. It's not that the CPU is going to use 4,000 watts. It's just that it will work up to the clock multiplier table, and it can't go past that. So that's power limits aren't the limits. Those limits are removed. It's no longer the limiting factor. There's always something that's going to limit you, whether it be power delivery, thermals, or hard specifications. And they're saying, look, if you deliver all the power that's required to hit the maximum level of performance, and this is Intel's language essentially, they're saying if you have power delivery to enable maximum performance, and of course the cooling capability to enable maximum performance, then you can enable maximum performance. And what that is the clock multiplier table.
I think what's been potentially a bit confusing compared to earlier times that we've looked into the power spec situation is that it does appear at this point that Intel is providing multiple recommendations. So previously, where there may have only been, the base minimum recommendation, which would be, for example, PL1 equals 125 watts as they advertise the TDP of the processors. And then there'll be a performance, let's call it the performance profile, though in some documents I've seen, it's not even listed as anything. It's just in there as an option. There'll be the performance profile, which would be more like your PL1 equals PL2 situation. But it seems even now that there are things like a standard profile, an extreme profile, which could be even above the PL1 equals PL2 configurations, for example, for KS series processors, where it's not even 250 watts, it might be 320 watts or some higher value. And then now it seems they've introduced, in addition to those, a baseline recommendation, which could potentially be a different range of configurations again. So they're kind of confused. It's I imagine that being working at a board partner right now, trying to figure out what is Intel saying here? What are the recommendations when they're recommending multiple different profiles, multiple different things that are all in spec? And then on top of that, also allowing everything else anyway, where you could really just run it at anything you want, provided that it's, within the hard limit listed in those documents. I imagine that that's a fairly confusing scenario to have as a board maker. So again, it's confusing for consumers clearly. So it gets difficult when there's so many different tables and those documents, they get revised over time, adding things in, changing things, trying to follow that, it's complicated.
Yeah, so the CPUs are crashing. There's instability reports. Intel's looked into it and they're recommending this baseline profile. We don't know. And look, I said this was speculation in my video. We speculated as to what may be happening. So if you have a CPU that you've loaded up and it's working, and it seems like they did work for a year, many months, they did work. And then all of a sudden we started getting more and more reports of instability. When you have some initial reports of instability, it's like, are you using 4 DIMM modules at DDR5 7200? What are you doing? Like, are you causing the instability, or is it just a bad CPU, or is it something else? But there's more and more reports of instability, and it could simply be, well, you would think it could simply be that the CPUs were being pushed too hard by default, and therefore for those workloads, they're crashing, which may be the case. And why has this been discovered a year on from the 13900K and stuff like that? Maybe those workloads didn't exist back then, or maybe people are starting to run workloads now that are causing problems. That could be one explanation, or it could be that the CPUs being pushed as hard as they are is they're seeing silicon degradation. Again, we suggested that as it seems like that's what's happening, but that is speculation on our behalf. That's not being confirmed. We don't know, but it does seem like a reasonable scenario to be taking place. And that also explains why some CPUs crash and some don't. You're going to see silicon degradation if you take a CPU and you overclock it and you run it really hot, high voltages, high frequencies. The very best silicon will do that for a long time, or it can. The very worst silicon, I guess let's go on a relative time scale. The crap silicon you're going to find out is crap silicon first. The good silicon is going to go longer for an undefined period of time. So if you're pushing these CPUs really hard, and it is, and we're not saying it is, but if it is degrading the silicon, it is the lowest quality silicon that is going to exhibit these problems first, which is why not everyone will crash when they run a specific game or workload, because the high quality silicon is essentially living with the task and the conditions that have been handled or thrown at it. So again, can't stress this enough. We don't know what the problem is. We just know that the CPUs, there wasn't many reports of CPUs crashing. Now there are lots of reports of CPUs crashing. Why that is, don't know. But that's essentially what's caused Intel to investigate. And their investigation has led to the creation of the Intel baseline profile. Now, I guess the next step in this is why. What is the Intel baseline profile? Why have they created it? My take on this, which I guess this is my opinion, everyone, you've got these boards that push the CPUs with no power limits, which we've already said is in spec and Intel was happy with it, but now Intel's looked into it and gone, oh, actually, these CPUs that may have degraded or may not just be good enough to run at these frequencies under these conditions need to be downgraded, and then they're stable, which is what people have found. That NVIDIA was already making this recommendation. Clock down your K-SKU CPU, solve stability. So they made the Intel baseline profile. So now when you contact Intel and you say, my 14900K is crashing on my MSI motherboard without power limits, they go, well, you're actually not running in spec, because publicly we haven't said that's in spec. It's got to be 253 watt versus 253 watt. But maybe that won't work anymore either. So they say, have you actually used the Intel baseline spec? Have you enabled that in your motherboard? Because that's the stability option. So then people go and do that. And in the case of Gigabyte, you go 188 watts as your peak for the whatever turbo duration that ends up being, with 125 watts being the base. which significantly reduces performance, especially for all-core workloads. But Intel can now claim, look, your system's stable now, isn't it? Go
Yep.
away. Problem solved. And again, it's Intel's trying to have their cake and eat it too. They want to sell 1400Ks and they want to show them winning benchmarks or trying to win benchmarks without power limits. But if that doesn't work out, then you've got the Intel baseline profile to enable, and that solves all the problems. So,
Yep.
and both are in spec.
And it's become more of an issue over time because originally when Intel first decided that power unlimiting is a perfectly reasonable way to approach CPUs, in terms of motherboard configurations, the
Mhm.
clock multiplier table, which is always been the hard limit on the performance, generally was quite a lot lower than it is now. So CPUs would be running at much lower frequencies. So when you're power unlimiting them and they're trying to run at the maximum clock the clock multiplier table allows for as long as they possibly can, we were more talking about, 4 gigahertz sort of range, maybe 5 gigahertz for some particular
Well,
workloads or some
i- i-
CPUs.
if I can jump in just to add to this, don't lose your train of thought. But you're right, but it's three things. The clock multiplier table was lower, so they're hitting lower frequencies. There was less cores, so
Yep.
the power consumption was a lot lower.
Yep.
And because the power consumption was a lot lower with less cores at lower frequencies, the operating temperature was much lower. But now you have higher frequencies,
Mhm.
significantly higher power usage, and significantly higher temperatures. And what do all of those things do for stability and potentially degradation? Nothing good.
Yeah, that's right. I'm sure there's been improvements with process node over time that's allowed them to handle this to some degree.
Maybe.
But particularly over the last couple of generations, we're effectively looking at the same silicon between the 13th and 14th gen series. So with
That's
something
key.
like a 14900K, it's basically a 13900K with a very small overclock. They released it as the 13900KS. The 14900K is basically a 13900KS. And that part in itself is already clocked up to 6 gigahertz. The 14900K, that is a 6 gigahertz part for its single core turbo frequency. And its all core turbo, though Intel doesn't really list this for you, is also quite high. So over time, they're stuck with silicon that, or CPU generations that they haven't really been able to eke out significant architectural changes, even compared to older Lake. Raptor Lake is still relatively similar. So over the last 3 generations, they've been thinking about, okay, how do we eke out more performance from these parts? We can't launch our new architecture just yet. So let's slightly raise the frequencies. Let's, basically that's what they're going to do. Slightly raise the frequencies on the parts, shift up some things to newer tiers, clock them higher. And then when you've got these motherboard configurations that they've allowed for so long to run at unlimited power, anytime you're raising the frequency, you're also signing up for increased power usage, potentially higher thermals as well, especially because across the last few generations it's on the same process node. So Intel is basically, they've made a decision a few years ago, quite a few years ago now, but has been relatively okay for the last couple of years in terms of the maximum performance configurations and stability. They've just gone, okay, whatever. It's all working fine for us, power unlimited, all good. But because they keep raising the limit higher and higher and higher, we're now seeing the potential for these parts to have stability issues due to that. Again, this is all just based on the most likely situation, I guess. We're still not sure 100%. But yeah, when you sort of look at the generations over time and the fact that it's largely the Core i9 processors that we're hearing reports about, which are the highest clocked models, that it makes sense that, again, if you sort of at one point saying run it at the highest power and then you're raising another limit somewhere else, you're going to run into issues potentially at some point. So again, Intel is kind of in this difficult position, as you mentioned in your content, about they can't really blame motherboard vendors entirely for this situation because it's something that they've brewed over a number of years. And I saw an Anantech article earlier today where they'd stated to them in specifically that they were not trying to ascribe blame to Intel's partners. So that's something that they have officially said to Anantech in response to probably people saying from the first statement that they're kind of trying to blame the motherboard vendors, but they've now
Yeah.
said they're not. But they can't. That's my point. They can't blame the motherboard vendors for reasons that we've been talking about. The fact that the configurations that they were listed were in spec behavior, the fact that over time they've been deliberately allowing this because it allows them to eke out more performance from their processors, and that potentially by raising the clock frequencies of their latest silicon, it's caused like a cascading effect where the decisions they made previously and have allowed are now leading to issues. So again, like they're basically just going to have to come out and say something like, guys, you know, we tried here, but this is the stable profile now. I imagine that by the time that they get around to their final statement, which they're saying will be some point in May of 2024, that there will be some concession that to gain the best stability, you will have to run them at a non-power unlimited state. So that's just
That
my
seems the
guess, at
most
least.
likely
Yeah.
outcome, yeah. And I think you brought up an important point there is the fact that 14 nanometer, there's the joke of the plus
Mhm.
plus, the plus 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 plus, and so on and so forth. What was it, like 6 or so years that they had to really eke out the most out of that 14 nanometer process, and they really knew what it took to break one of those CPUs. They had so much data,
Yeah.
so much user data from a lower point as well, a lower starting point, as you said. They built up and they really got to the tipping point, I suppose, for 14 nanometer, which they were forced to do because they were stuck there for so long.
Mhm.
And they've jumped on the new marketed Intel 7 process, and they've started from a really high point in terms of power consumption with no real significant data on these CPUs in the wild. Like there's no long-term data how well they degrade and stuff like that, because obviously all CPUs degrade to some degree. You just hope it's an insignificant factor for the lifetime of that product and not within a year. And again, we don't know if they are degrading, but something's
Mhm.
causing them to become, they were stable, at least as far as I knew, and now lots of user reports of them not being stable. Uh,
Yeah, and over that period, like that's effectively what killed CPU overclocking as well, because over time they realized that,
mm,
well, we could just offer effectively an overclock that consumers were getting, but we can now just make that our official default behavior for those parts, which genuinely did deliver most of or a significant portion of the performance uplifts over that 14
yeah, that's
nanometer
right.
Skylake generation. They went from lower clock speeds with a lot of overclocking headroom to high default clock speeds with no headroom, and then on top of that, they started shrinking down the gap between the different power configurations, so that really you could just run it at higher for longer, basically. And as you say, that has led to the default situation now. I think another thing that I wanted to touch on as well is some of the complaints or criticism that I saw relating to you saying that multiple power configurations is anti-consumer, which is not really what you said, but some people
Mm.
interpreted
I
your
didn't,
statement to
yeah,
mean that.
I did address this on X, Twitter, whatever you want to call the bloody platform. I did already address that, but yeah, we can talk about it here
Mhm.
because, yeah, I did see more than one person sort of talking about that. And yeah, I guess I was confused by that response or that take initially because it didn't make sense. When you put out a video like that and you say some stuff and you try to be quite careful, like when you say, right now, guys, we're speculating based
Yeah.
on all available information that this is what seems like's happening. This seems like what is happening, but to be clear, I'm speculating. So you do that. And when you talk about things like what is anti-consumer, because that's a big thing to throw out there, right? We don't do that lightly. You
Mhm.
know, we don't say that them taking our CDs away from our motherboards is anti-consumer. We don't just throw that out there for something we don't like or don't agree with. Um, and so, yeah, I thought, what the hell did I act? Because it was late, a Sunday night. I worked all bloody weekend to get that content done. And when I woke up Monday morning, I thought to myself, what the hell did I actually say to warrant these responses? And I actually went back and looked at the script first because that's the quickest thing to do. I thought, okay, the script makes sense. So what the hell did I say? And then I go watch it back. I'm like, I don't know how you can't comprehend what I'm saying there. Like, how does that get misinterpreted to be that? It was very clear. I thought I delivered it. I did a pretty good job of scripting it, thinking through what it was that I was trying to say, and then delivering that message. But
It's
clearly
always
not.
hard to know how people are going to interpret what you've said, even if you've thought about it for a lot. But I mean, the way I interpreted it is not the way that these people have interpreted in terms of, it being anti-consumer to provide multiple power configurations. You were saying that it was more related to the way that they've advertised these platforms and the different power levels that are available, and the fact that some consumers are not getting what is advertised because of the broadness of power configurations, that is the anti-consumer aspect, not the fact that there are multiple power configurations. It's more around the advertising and the promotion of the platform and what consumers should be expecting.
Yeah, that's right. It's rife for abuse. So not just at the high end where it looks like they're running out of spec with these unlimited power things, which we've already explained to death now, that isn't out of spec, but they can go the other way, which for me is a bigger deal. Like getting more performance than you may be expected to get. That's a happy accident. Okay. If it degrades your CPU or whatever, then
Yeah.
let's not go there again. But what is the spec? What is in spec? What is out of spec? And apparently running a Core i9 processor below the advertised base clocks is somehow still in spec. What? How is that a thing? And it's been happening for a very long time now. We've exposed it so many times. And of course, the usual boneheaded response is, but who's going to put a Core i9 processor on those motherboards? Not the bloody point. And also OEMs, that's who's going to do it. OEMs, they do it all the bloody time, but apparently it's okay. So, give people, you can put Core i9 processor on the box, and then someone goes, oh, Dell's selling me a Core i9 processor. They're good, aren't they? Yeah, they're really good. And how much can I get that from PC Case Gear for? PC Case Gear is charging extra $500 for their Core i9 system. I'll just get the Dell. But then you find out PC Case Gear is charging $500 more because they have a motherboard with an actual VRM on it. And Dell's selling you something that they power the onboard audio with, and the thing melts after 2 seconds and you end up running it like a gigahertz or gigahertz, sorry. I don't like that at all. I hate that situation. I hate that we're starting to see it. We've been seeing it a bit from AMD. We've exposed that a few times on the AMD side. Less egregious because those CPUs do use considerably less power. So the same crap VRMs they use for Intel does get better results with a Ryzen processor, but it still underperforms. And I've spoke with AMD directly about this and say it's something they need to tighten up on. I don't want to see that. But, without pushback from the community, without any blowback, it's like, well, we make money doing that. And people don't seem upset enough for us to care. Yeah, so that's how those things go.
Yeah, this is the real reason why I'm not a fan of this whole power spec situation. I think the power specification is too loose, and it seems pretty, I wouldn't say it's clear, but my interpretation of why they have allowed such a broad range of configurations. Like, obviously the question is, right, why have they allowed power unlimited specs to potentially cause stability issues, and why do they allow it to be so low? And they get benefits on either end. So if all their advertising, I've looked at quite a bit of it, the majority that I've seen, they advertise the performance that you get based on their recommended configuration. So that typically means, at least for the modern parts, PL1 equals PL2 equals 253 watts. So you'll see their performance charts. They've got their numbers. It's based on their recommendations. It makes sense. That's a good way of going about it. If you recommend one thing, you're backing it up by saying this is the performance that you'll get. The reason why they would allow the power unlimited configurations is because let's have a scenario, right, where you, Steve, at Hardware Unboxed are reviewing these parts, and you've stated clearly that you test the default configuration on the motherboards. However it comes, that's how you'll test. And Intel would be aware that some default configurations are going to be above their recommended spec. They're going to be power unlimited, which may give a little more performance. Now, is Intel really going to be that upset if you've tested above their recommended spec and it turns out their parts are a little bit more competitive in the performance charts relative to their competitors, like AMD, for example? They're not going to complain about that at all. They're going to be happy that, if anything, you've shown their processor in a better light than they otherwise would have. So this is why they would allow the maximum power unlimited spec. It allows the independent reviewers to come to, especially when they largely focus on, and they know this, reviewers largely focus on performance. They might mention power. Power is becoming probably more of an issue over these generations, but usually the focus is the benchmark charts. How close does it get to a 7800 X3D? Is it 5%? Is it 10% behind? Is it equal? Power Unlimited gets them closer to the numbers that they want to see, which is...
It ensures the best possible outcome in terms of performance is what it does.
That's right. So they're happy with that situation, right? Then on the other end of the scale, by having the processors be able to be nerfed by the dodgiest motherboards and it still being in spec, it allows them to have their motherboard partners happy producing the lowest quality motherboards or the cheapest stuff while still being able to legitimately and fairly, though potentially
No.
misleading, but it is
Misleading.
it is fair testing. They can advertise one thing while ensuring their OEMs are happy by allowing them to create a configuration that's much cheaper and much more affordable. And it allows two other benefits. The first one is that they can advertise a lower TDP on the product page. So you'll notice that while they recommend 253 watts for the PL1 and PL2 configurations in their benchmark charts, the 14900K is advertised as a 125 watt processor. So they won't be able to advertise it as 125 watts if that's not an official spec. And the reason why they don't want to advertise 253 watts is because AMD's parts are like 65, 95, 125 watts, right? So they don't want to have a massive disadvantage in one of those specs, so that's why they allow that. And secondly, they don't want to have the entry point to the platform too high, because the obvious factor of increasing power specs over time, making the CPUs require more power, is that board manufacturers need to put more resources and more money into developing the power stages to run those CPUs. So if they were mandating 253 watts to power a 14900K, then the cheapest motherboards to run a 14900K, maybe they're now more expensive than you'd see from AMD platforms. Potentially for OEMs as well, the baseline level to get into a Core i9 system is now higher because the motherboard manufacturers have to make a more expensive board, raises the entire cost of the system. And all of these things, while they do impact the board makers as well, because they can't, they want to make cheap stuff, it also impacts Intel in all of these scenarios. There's no scenario really with these situations apart from being misleading and people calling them out on it. All of these scenarios benefit Intel and it misleads consumers, which
Does that make it anti-consumer, Tim?
I think it does. And I think it's ridiculous that there are Intel boards that advertise compatibility with the 14900K that run at like 30 or 40% lower performance or even more than what you would see with Intel's recommended spec, how they advertise the CPUs in their charts and how you would review it. I think that's ridiculous. That should not be happening. But they don't want to concede that the boards can't run a 14900K, so they lower the TDP and blah, 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 goes on, as I've just said.
Yeah, and a simple solution would be to make a 65 watt series of motherboards and only support 65 watt CPUs. And look, this has been a big problem for Intel for a long time, but it's not just Intel. To be fair, this is also a problem on AMD's side. Mm-hmm. Again, less significant so because their CPUs do use less power, especially the flagship models, but it is still a problem. We have seen that Ryzen 9 processors won't deliver their full performance on even some B650 motherboards, which wasn't the case initially, but crappy B650 motherboards have been snuck out over the past 6 months or so, and they suck. We did a video dedicated to it, exposing all those boards and telling people not to buy them, and it really waters down, muddies sort of the AM5 platform and makes it a bit more of a minefield as to what you should be buying, because there are $125 US boards that work perfectly fine with all AM5 motherboards, and there are some that are bloody awful and shave a lot off what you should be getting. So it's definitely an AMD problem as well, but it's a more significant Intel problem.
It's kind of a game of chicken. Like you don't want to be Intel or AMD, the first brand to concede that some motherboards actually can't run your highest performing processors. So, the obvious solution to this, and it has been obvious for a long time, is if Intel wants to provide multiple power configurations, or AMD or any CPU manufacturer, as we've said, it's not anti-consumer to provide multiple power configurations and to advertise, let's say for Intel, a lower TDP for various reasons, right? But when you do that, what comes with it is, in my opinion, two responsibilities. The first one is, if you're allowing a lower TDP, you should advertise that performance as well. So if there's a minimum spec that's below what you've typically recommended, fine. so long as in the charts they're showing the maximum and the minimum. What they've always done is only show the maximum. If they're going to have two, show both. Should be clearly specified. And then if there are some boards that don't even reach the minimum power configuration or whatever, it should be clearly advertised that those parts are not supported. And in addition to that, but probably don't advertise things like extreme overclocking capabilities on boards that are power limited. So, obviously, Intel and AMD effectively allow those high performance processors to be supported on those motherboards. If they clamp down and they said, no, your Core i9 is not supported on a board that doesn't deliver this level of power, and you must make that clear in the list of supported CPUs, then that would benefit consumers. It wouldn't be as anti-consumer. It wouldn't be anti-consumer because everything would be clearly specified for consumers. But the fact that all these downsides and negatives to the way that these things are configured just so happens to hurt consumers and not really hurt the manufacturers is bad. It shouldn't be tolerated.
Then they're never, ever going to change this because it makes them money, lots of money, and people don't seem to be able to get on the same page. Like there's that. I know, when did we talk about this? Was it AMD when people were, I feel like every time this sort of thing happens, I sit here and I can't comprehend the people defending the giant corporation.
Yeah.
Like when you were saying, look, all available information to me, it looks very suspicious and AMD won't clear their name. Why does it appear that they're blocking DLSS and they won't clarify? Like, and then people are absolutely after blood from you. It's like, ask the questions, guys. Why are you defending AMD here? Like, what? Poor little AMD. And whatever we've gone up against one of these companies, it doesn't matter which one it is, we've found the same thing. No person who buys computer parts, buys pre-built systems, no one should be defending Intel here. And you shouldn't be attacking us or anyone else giving the message going, oh, but I don't agree with this particular point. Hang on. Whether you agree with us fully or not, you have to acknowledge that advertising the support for CPUs that you can't run anywhere near where they should be running to deliver anywhere near the advertised performance is bad. So all other noise that for some reason you're allowing yourself to get distracted with, or you're not understanding what we're saying or whatever, like I can't get past that. Like, this is bad. You have to understand that this is bad. You know what I mean, Tim? Like you can't sell this motherboard saying it supports this CPU because it physically fits in the socket and will boot into Windows. But when you actually go to perform a task, it doesn't deliver you anywhere near the advertised performance.
Yeah, I don't get it.
It's like I don't know, Ferrari releasing a new car that's more affordable than the previous Ferrari, so I guess you could buy it. And they say it's got an 800 horsepower engine and do 200 miles per hour. But when you get it and you put your foot down, it takes off like a Hyundai. And they're like, well, it because of the cooling that we didn't put in the car, it's restricted the performance. But it is an 800 horsepower engine. You've just got to like upgrade the cooling and change the power delivery, and then it works. Like, people wouldn't be cool with that, right? Like, I think that'd be a pretty obvious thing to comprehend, that they're not selling you what they've told you it can do. So anyway, I don't know. I guess I just get hung up on that, and I can't even, Tim. I just can't explain when people come out and attack us for trying to expose something dodgy these companies are doing. It happens every time. It happens no matter whether it's AMD, Nvidia, Asus, MSI. I remember when I said the Asus Strix cards were dodgy, and I copped all that backlash, and then it turned out they were dodgy. It's a weird fit to get off topic and not pat ourselves on the back, though. That might be nice to do that for a bit. Do you want to have a back pat session? Let's ignore our boring lives and we'll spend 20 minutes doing some back patting. That'll be fun. No, but in all seriousness, this is sort of a personal, we'll talk personally on the podcast, I guess, but it's a weird thing, right? When we do the testing we do the investigation behind the scenes that we do to get all this information that other people aren't in the position, I suppose, of privilege or whatever you want to call it, to just ring up the engineers at Asus or MSI and say, guys, what the hell's going on? And they sort of like, sometimes they spill the beans completely and tell you crap they're not meant to tell you, or other times they do their best to tell you what they want to tell you without getting into trouble. So we have all this access. We can find out all this extra information. So it does help us investigate and find out what's really going on, or improve our chances of making an educated guess, like what we did with the Asus Strix cards, like what we've done with so many other topics. And we cop all this flack, and then when it's proven that we're right about it, it's kind of a weird feeling. Like, or even this power thing, like I'm not saying we're absolutely right. Like I'm not saying that the CPUs are definitely degrading and Intel's screwed up here and it's all a massive disaster, though it is somewhat of a disaster, let's be honest. But we've warned Intel that this is going to be a problem, this poorly defined or broadly defined power spec. And it looks to me like it's biting them in the backside, and this situation could be quite bad for them and quite difficult to resolve, potentially costly. So that's annoying for them. We've been warning about it for 6 years now. Just I can't even think off the top of my head. There's been so many situations where we've copped it. I know this, the VRAM thing, people, again, the VRAM thing's one of those things I can't comprehend, right? Guys, it'd be so good if when you spend $300-$400, you don't get 8 gigabytes of VRAM. Whether you want to say that we were basing this all on one flawed port, which we clearly weren't, and we showed that, but we're on your side. Like, and we clearly explained the whole VRAM situation, right? That they still work, but it would be good to have more VRAM. And I'm sure that's going to come back as true. It's just, but anyway, you had the Asus laptop where you copped tons of flack about being wrong about that. And then they changed the design. So there's been, over the years, we've had over a dozen examples where we've copped serious heat from either the companies or the viewers or both. And not all the viewers, but, the people.
It's a minority for sure.
It's a minority of pitchforkers, but it's kind of weird when it goes on for that long and then it comes up and it's like, yeah, that thing we've been saying would be a problem. It was a problem.
I agree. Yeah, it is a bit of a weird sort of feeling when those sort of things happen. But yeah, I feel like with a lot of those people that bring up these points and sort of always take the side of the companies, I feel like there are times when I could understand that perspective. Like you wouldn't want reviewers, for example, making up crap about a product in one area that it could be that needs to be improved, that doesn't really need to be improved and would make products worse or more costly. Like, for example, if instead of saying that 8 gigabyte GPU should actually have 16 gigabytes of VRAM, right? And we were saying, oh, they should have 64 gigabytes of VRAM. Like, obviously, yes, it would be nice from a consumer standpoint if 8 gigabyte GPUs were upgraded to 64 gigabytes of VRAM, right? Like, that's clearly better for consumers. But at the same time, the downside would be that the cards would be much more expensive. Like there's if they were offering 64 gig of VRAM, it costs them a lot more money. So in just the components. You
got to be reasonable and realistic.
So yeah, it's got to be reasonable. I feel like I think some people, not all people that make those sort of complaints are concerned about those aspects. So I think some people who are saying, who are thinking about our points on 16 gigabytes of VRAM being what should be the minimum for GPUs, I'm sure some people were thinking, oh, well, a 16 gigabyte GPU is going to be a lot more expensive, and I'm only just barely able to afford the 8 gig card. So if it was 16 gig and way more expensive, then that would be bad for me. But obviously, at the same time, there are lots of people who are taking the side of corporations because they are fans of the companies. They want to see the companies succeed over the consumer. And that is a weird position to take. If you're not, especially if you're not a shareholder or significantly financially invested in the company, if you've got
if you are a shareholder, you should keep your mouth shut. Like it's so slimy and disgusting.
Well,
like,
yeah, you're a bit of a grifter, isn't it? If you're going around complaining about products because I've got millions of dollars tied up in Nvidia stock or whatever, so please don't do those good, beneficial to consumer things. It's like, okay, just shut up, mate. But like again, I don't want to say that those complaints are most of the comments that we get, because absolutely not the case. Most people that watch our content, that comment, that tag us in things on Twitter, even the Reddit thread for your latest Intel video had a lot of very reasonable points in discussion. It was not like we went on Reddit and it's all whinging and that sort of thing. Even when we bring up Reddit as being sometimes the source of that stuff, generally most people have fair and reasonable points. So I just want to be very clear that this is not a majority of people.
Yeah, admittedly, I unfairly target Reddit. Like, it can be a good place, and there can be, they're good people there with good opinions and stuff. I let the minority of what's a word I could use, Tim? Anyway, you guys know what I mean.
The bad opinions.
Yeah, the bad. I let them taint my opinion there. Let's say. Anywho, what were we saying? Get me on this one, Tim.
Is there anything else to wrap up the Intel power situation for now?
No, I guess when you were saying, you can understand people's opinions, I think that's probably an important thing to end on this one, is that you're not silly, you're not stupid. It's very easy to look at what Intel's saying and say, well, Intel's being clear about this stuff. Like, as a consumer, as someone who buys this stuff and looks at it, it looks like Intel's being above board. It looks like they're clearly defining a specification, and here we are saying they're not. So I can certainly understand why people think that we're trying to unfairly bash Intel and we're trying to make a mountain out of a molehill and stretch the truth. But the truth is, it's actually more complicated than it appears to be, and the motherboard manufacturers, or whoever you think may be to blame, may not be to blame. And look, we've been in the same position, and this is what I was sort of talking about a moment ago. We have the ability to find out more information privately by speaking with certain individuals and companies. And we were trying to work this out a long time ago. Who's actually, is the motherboard manufacturers at fault, and why is Intel allowing them to do it, which logically makes no sense for reasons we've already discussed. So we reached out to the motherboard manufacturers, and they told us, no, it's in-spec behavior. We're allowed to do this. This is part of the Intel specification. Then we reached out to Intel and got directly from them. So it is confusing. There is a lot of different angles to this story. It is pretty complex stuff. So I don't hold it against someone who looks at it and goes, but no, it's clearly defined. It's PL1 equals PL2. Like, what are you guys on about? The motherboard manufacturers are to blame. They're running above that. So, I have sympathy for that point of view, but yeah, there is more to it.
Yeah, that's right. And companies always use very specific language when discussing these things. So, for example, when Intel says that they have certain recommendations, that doesn't mean that they are the only official specs, which I think, that wording can often be stretched at times. Recommended becomes mandatory or defined or in spec and those sorts of things. Intel, I'm reading the statement that they have given to Igor's lab and Antec right now, and it only says recommended, and they have clearly specifically used that word for that purpose. So
they like wiggle room.
They do like wiggle room, but yeah, as you say, it's so confusing in the way that they've handled this situation over the last few years that it does take. We've been recording this podcast for like 90 minutes now, probably talking about this for over an hour, trying to get our heads around these sorts of things and explain what's going on. But I feel that it has to come to a point where Intel has to actually tell people what they want for this platform. Like, release a list of the things that they're telling to motherboard vendors so that general consumers can get their heads around what is and isn't actual official specifications. Just once and for all, clear the air properly, list the various different features. And yeah, some of it's going to be confusing. People might not know what ICC Max is and all those sorts of different things, which is fair enough. They're usually things that are not exposed to consumers. But I feel like in this instance, the level of confusion that we've gotten to around the power limits on Intel platforms over the last 6 years has gotten to the point where some clarity from Intel in an official capacity would be very warranted. Just talking about, here's the minimum and maximums, here's our recommendations, this is what we believe is the best configuration, board partners can do this or that, clear the air. I think that would be good, but we'll see. Probably don't have too much boring life to talk about, but we'll take a break and we'll come back and get into it. We're back to talk about our boring lives. This long podcast is continuing with other things that have been happening. What's been happening on your end, Steve, in the last week?
Well, it hasn't actually been a week, has it? We're recording this earlier than we normally would, so no football's taken place, none of that sort of stuff, at least new games. But I have done some things. So my boring life was a little bit exciting today because I went for a quick drive to pick up a brand new trailer.
Okay.
I'm going to do an experiment. So, I like my kayak fishing.
Yep.
And I have my kayak fishing trailer, my aluminium sort of tradie trailer that I spent a lot of money on, and I've customized it. And I put 2 large sailing kayaks up on top. I've got rod holders inside and all this stuff, and it's fantastic. Except I have to admit, I am getting older, Tim, and lifting an 85 kilogram kayak up off the ground over my shoulder and on top of a tradie trailer that's about 5.5 to 6 foot high off the ground is hurting me more than it used to. So I can do it a couple of times, no dramas. But we go away on the 1 week long fishing trip.
Yeah.
By the 4th day, my shoulder's very bruised and quite tender, and I can still do it, so it's okay at the moment, but I'm only getting older, I've been told. So
Sure.
I was like, there's got to be a different situation. So I actually bought, and this is as an experiment, a reasonably expensive experiment, but I can probably recoup my funds if I have to, but that's a future me problem. I bought a flatbed car trailer, a 16-foot long car trailer. Now, my kayaks are 18 foot long, but my previous trailer was an 8x5 trailer, so it was 8 foot long. So the 16-foot one, I'm going to change the way it's all laid out. But basically, I'll be able to wheel my kayak with the armors on it and everything, because it's a sailing kayak all together, and just slide it onto the trailer, which is what some of the guys I go away with who are about 10 years older than me, they have similar setups, but not quite as extreme as what I'm going for here. And because it's not an aluminium trailer like my tradie trailer, it's mild steel, I can now weld like a frame onto it to make a second level for the second kayak. And then I can put like containers and boxes, like lock boxes. See the back of utes? They're locked boxes. I can sort of do that on the trailer wherever I want, wherever it fits in between where the kayaks would go.
Yep.
So I'll probably film that as like a BTS thing and put it on the channel, because I've never done this sort of thing before. I've done things like it, of course, but so I got the trailer. It's very cool, very happy with it. And now my little mind is exploding with 1,000 different things that I can do to it to customize it for the 2 big sailing kayaks I've got.
Nice.
So that's a side project. I'll also be getting onto my monitor stand, which obviously I spoke about that like 6 months ago. Balin had his operation, a lot of things happened, and that got put on the back burner. But I'm going to pick that up shortly and finish it off. And I've been using it in sort of like a prototype phase, which I think I spoke to you about when you were here last, Tim, and I was spitballing ideas for cable management. So I'm really happy with how that's gone. I'm stoked with it. Love it. So
nice.
It's given me encouragement to finish it off and sort of commit to that now that it's sort of proof of concept phase complete. Great success. So happy with that. And what else? What else is there, Tim? Have I done anything else? Bought the trailer. Oh, I also bought a plasma cutter, so that'll be handy for other metal
cool.
Yeah. I had a friend who had a plasma cutter, and I used to borrow that, but he's since long moved away, and I don't have access to his plasma cutter anymore, and they're relatively inexpensive now. So, I've got the Unimig Viper welder, that one I bought when I did your studio. So I bought a Unimig plasma cutter.
Nice.
Because I want to make, and another thing I want to make is, how I like to move mulch and spread that around my gardens.
Sure, yep.
Yeah, how
you
that's
got some
a fun
good
pastime.
hobbies. Yeah.
Mate, that's one of my favorites. So we had 50 cubic meters of mulch delivered just before the weekend gone. So that's a lot of mulch, and that's one of the things I took some time off. I did spend a good portion of my Sunday on that, and I still managed to get that video out. Didn't sleep much, but yeah, moved 50 cubic meters in one day all around the 5-acre property with the mini skid steer. But I've got a 4-in-1 bucket, which is, those buckets that can open and clamp onto things and do all fancy stuff like that. That's what's on my skid steer, and it works really well. But it's a very thick, durable bucket. It's like 12 mil thick steel. You can ram it into things and smash things with it and do all that kind of fun stuff. But it doesn't scoop up that much mulch. And I've looked at mulch buckets, and they're only like, I did the math on it, Tim. I nearly burnt a fuse. But they're about 50% bigger. I was like, it's not really worth spending $1,000 changing from the hydraulic 4-in-1 bucket to a mulch bucket that's only 50% bigger. I mean, 50% is not nothing, but I kind of want it to be double or more. So I started looking, and the good old Americans, whenever there's something I need or think of doing, the Americans have done it. So I found a few cowboys that have got mini skid steers and just made custom, like not really thick heavy duty buckets, but more than heavy duty enough for scooping mulch. And they've made like these 1.5 meter wide buckets that take like 1 cubic meter in one go.
Nice.
Because being able to drive the skid steer around the property to awkward spots to dump mulch there is way quicker than like loading a trailer, then getting the trailer as close as you can, then putting that mulch in like wheelbarrows, and then it's like a lot of double handling. It's a lot of hard work.
Yeah.
Whereas if you can back the skid steer and just dump a huge load there, that'd be great. So I was like, I'm following the American example on YouTube. So that's why I bought the plasma cutter, so I can cut through 6 to 12 mil thick steel. And I've ordered some plate, some sheet steel, and I'm going to make myself a bucket.
Nice.
So
how much are you going for? Like double the volume, triple the volume?
I'm going for double. Well, I don't know. I'm going for double minimum.
Yeah.
But like there's obviously some constraints in the sense that if you make the bucket itself way too heavy, the machine can't operate it very well. And then transporting it on the hill becomes very dicey. Obviously reverse and stuff like that and keep the bucket low. But there's things like that you have to be aware of. And then also there's the ability to actually scoop and load the bucket without just like hitting the mulch pile and it gets a couple of crumbs because, you know, you can't get traction to shove the thing in there. And there are ways you can get around that by scooping up piles and things. So there are techniques that you can use. So I feel like there'll be versions. Having said that, I said that about my monitor stand and I bloody nailed that thing to perfection.
Sure.
Almost. Minor adjustment and should be good.
I'm keen to see how that project goes.
Yeah, bent buckets in my future. But I'm excited about that. That'll be fun. So I get to do get to modify the trailer and make some buckets, something I've never ever done before.
Nice.
Looking forward to it. So I think that's me done, Tim.
Yeah, so I have much less exciting projects going on at the moment. Really no projects. Just my usual day-to-day life. One thing I wanted to talk about, which most people are probably aware of at this point, the Fallout TV series, which is on Amazon Prime. So I finished watching it. I know Balin's finished watching it and he quite liked it as well. So for anyone who, for some reason, is sort of a PC gamer and hasn't watched this series, I do strongly recommend it. I think it's great right to the end of the series. They've renewed it for a second series as well. So it will be continuing, which is nice to hear. But yeah, I really rate this series. I think a lot of, video game adaptations at times have been quite poor, especially on the movie side of things. But with The Last of Us TV series and now the Fallout TV series, I feel like we've had two very good quality TV series that really live up to the games, because the Fallout series of games is one of my favorite series of all time. Fallout 3 and New Vegas in particular are fantastic games. Fallout 4, some people don't like it. I thought it was fine. Good game for sure. So yeah, it really captures the essence of those games in the show to a really good degree. Like they're not trying to overly change the lore of the series or retcon things or just completely change the feel and make it something that it really isn't. It feels like a Fallout thing. So that was really cool to see. And my partner, who is not a Fallout fan, she's never played the games, she watched the show with me and really enjoyed it and really got into some of the cool aspects of the Fallout series, things like trying to figure out what's going on with the vaults, what's the sort of backstory with that, what's the backstory regarding vault tech and those sorts of things, the wasteland. All of those things are sort of covered in a really interesting way. So even if you're not someone that has played the games or has enjoyed the games, there's a lot to appreciate about Fallout as sort of that post-apocalyptic wasteland sort of drama TV series. There's some funny moments in there as well. It is very violent and gory, so if that's not something that you really like about shows, then probably give this one a pass. But I think they've done a really good job. So yeah, that was cool to see. It's cool that they didn't ruin Fallout in a TV series because that would have really disappointed me. The other thing that I want to talk about, something that I think is underrated at the moment, and that is if you're watching TV shows, movies, having rear speakers is, I think it's better than it's ever been, the ability to have rear speakers in your audio setup. Since I've changed in my TV area, for a while there, I had a nice 5.1 surround sound setup. Then I moved house and I just moved to having front speakers. I'm like, okay, this is a bit of a downgrade, only having the front speakers. But at the start of this year, I swapped to a soundbar, which has rear speakers. I bought one of those Samsung ones that comes with the wireless rear speakers, similar to one that you've got at your place. And I've been very impressed with the mixing of a lot of TV series these days that actually allows the rear speakers to do something.
Mm.
I feel like about 10 years ago, you'd get movies that would have really good surround sound mixes, especially action movies, sci-fi movies, those sorts of things. But I think with the emergence of Dolby Atmos, which has improved things, and now a lot of TV series like Fallout. I've been watching Shogun. I've been watching some nature documentaries recently that have had a lot of just ambient sounds from the rear and those sort of effects. I think having rear speakers needs more attention. So if you're looking to elevate your TV setup, something that could really benefit is having genuine, real rear speakers. None of those projection things or simulating it from front speakers. I mean, actually having physical speakers behind you. Because if you enjoy those types of shows where it's a lot of action scenes, your Star Wars shows, even though a lot of those have been disappointing, those sorts of things, then yeah, I think it's really changed and elevated my sort of little TV setup that I've got going along. So I'd recommend that.
Yeah. Well, they're no longer a pain in the rear, pun intended.
Yeah,
there,
true.
Because they used to be an absolute pain in the rear, having to
Wire them
run
in.
all the wires
Yeah.
and do all that crap. It sucks. I know a lot of people couldn't be bothered, but the wireless tech now is so good in them. It's been flawless.
Yeah.
So I've got a setup in here and one in the house. It's Bose here, Samsung inside. Both of them flawless, work really well. Highly recommend. And it's cool. A lot of the systems now you can also add them, like they're modular.
Yeah, that's
so
right.
You can just introduce, you know, if you can't afford the Bose system, for example, I got the Bose 900 soundbar. Then you could get the sub. I forget what that's called, but it's the wireless subwoofer. It works really well. And then you can get the wireless, rear speakers to go with it, and you can add them in whenever you like. So it's kind of cool that you can do that. But yeah, obviously there's probably much more cost-effective solutions available. So I'm not necessarily recommending them. I'm not a sound guy, but they work well. So
yeah, I mean, I think I just went on, like, I'd heard your opinions about the Samsung soundbar with rear speakers option.
You were like, I've heard all I need to.
Well, I do trust your recommendations, but to complement that, I did also look at Ratings, the website that tests TVs, monitors. They've got a great soundbar / audio system section. I looked on there. They sort of confirm what you were saying about the Samsung soundbar being great. And it wasn't
good
to get the version that had the rear speaker functionality. I didn't get the top of the line one, but I got the one that was slightly the one down from the top of the line model, which I think sacrifices maybe some height or surround, the speakers that they try and point to reflect off the ceiling for Dolby Atmos and stuff. It has too few of those relative to the top model. So it's, instead of being 13 speakers, it's 11 or something, which is perfectly fine.
Right. I think I did get the top model one, but it was either that one or the one you got. I did, to be fair, I did read or watch quite a few videos and reviews and stuff, and that's how I landed on that particular model.
Yeah.
Just because it was for the family and stuff, so I wanted to make sure that it was pretty good. So it wasn't just I walked in and bought whatever. I did some research.
Yeah, I totally expect that you would, which is why I can go on your recommendation, because you're someone that actually does research things.
Whereas, I like to, yeah.
So other people's product recommendations, they could be more of a walk into a store and just buy something. But yeah, what was good is that when I got on sale in like last year, at the end of last year, it cost me less than $1,000 US, $1,000 Australian for the whole soundbar setup with the rear speakers, which I think for a genuine rear speaker, wireless setup, lots of audio channels, good quality, for what
good value.
What would ultimately be $600, $700 US, something around there. That's pretty good for me. Like, if I was sitting here being like a snob and saying like, hey, please buy this $5,000 sound setup where you've got all your crazy audio channels all over the place, then I wouldn't be as keen on it. But the fact that it's relatively affordable, I wouldn't say it's overly affordable, but it's relatively affordable, and that there's a lot of content now that genuinely uses rear speakers or provides a Dolby Atmos track or something along those lines, especially for like the flagship TV shows of today. I think it is something that's worth looking at for your setup, provided that you've got the ability to have rear speakers. But as you've pointed out, like, you don't have to wire them in anymore. You just plug in the power. It's all wireless in terms of the actual audio signals.
you can buy optional stands. They can sit right
Yeah.
behind your couch or whatever you've got. I ended up making a piece of furniture for my wife that she wanted that was, I think you might have seen it, that I've integrated the speakers into.
Yeah.
And that worked really well. Yeah. So anyway.
So yeah, I'd recommend rear speakers, and whether or not the Samsung soundbar is the best option for you, I'm not sure. Probably do more research on that, but it certainly works well, at least in the configuration that I've got, and has got all the latest audio processing features. So whatever formats I throw at it, it plays them, and that's usually something that I specifically look at, making sure that no matter what file or streaming service or whatever that I'm using, it works flawlessly. So yeah, Fallout TV series, rear speakers, the Shogun
All
series
good.
that I mentioned briefly, there's also quite good. Recommend that. So yeah, that's it for this episode, I guess. No more boring life to talk about. And this is probably our longest ever podcast. So hope you've stuck around to the end if you wanted to hear us talk about a variety of different things in this one. But yeah, appreciate everyone that listens to the end. It does help out, especially with the YouTube stats. So thank you. What else is there to say? We've got our audio feed and visual feed, depending on the versions that you are interested in. So go on either of those places if you're interested. And aside from that, we'll be back next week for another episode. There's nothing that's really coming up, so we'll see what we're going to be talking about, but I'm sure there'll be more interesting things. So yeah, thanks for listening, and we'll see you in the next one.